Who was the guy who played the halftime show? It was awful. I couldn't understand him. He literally told us to turn the TV off at the end. Like, who does that?
Nobody pray for me. It's been a day for me.
That was just one of over 100 complaints to the FCC over the renowned Kendrick Lamar's halftime show performance. While some would view his performance as lewd, racist, pro-hood, and mocking, many people, including the New York Times, would view it as political art. By using the framework of critical race theory, I analyzed a section of Lamar's halftime show in order to understand why Black America is represented how it is today. Critical race theory dates back to the 1970s and was developed as a form of legal scholarship used to criticize the American system. CRT relies on the idea that racism is a normality rather than an aberration, and that through analysis, one could advocate for meaningful change. The performance begins with African-American actor Samuel L. Jackson introducing himself as
"It's your Uncle Sam,"
a wartime propaganda figure who has historically been portrayed as an old white dude. He acts as America personified, a satirical representation of American nationalism and control that is prevalent through what he calls
Great American Game.
At several instances, Jackson interjects and criticizes the performance. For example, right after he says,
No. Too loud, too reckless, too ghetto.
Jackson wants the performance to conform to politics of respectability, a method of assimilation that involves abandoning the so-called controversial aspects of a cultural identity in order to appear more like the dominant group. In this instance, Jackson wants them to be more white. Lamar would initially comply with this warning, moving on to playing Humble, a more favorable song that quite literally asks you to
Be humble. Sit down. Be humble. Sit down. Be humble.
However, while conforming to these politics of respectability may be seen as a form of resisting oppression, CRT would argue that this is merely reinforcing the white-dominated culture. A core component of CRT is that racism is a normality, with its presence being within everyday society. Being seen as being respectable is not resisting the system, but allowing others to take the blame. Lamar would continue playing for conformity, falling into DNA before this visual appears. After this sign appears, Lamar goes back to being quote-unquote unrespectable, with him first being loud and reckless, before appearing ghetto, causing another reaction from Jackson.
Why you think you deserve the greatest of all time? I see you brought your homeboys with you. The old culture cheat code. Scorekeeper, deduct one life.
This derogatory rhetoric implies that bringing together a culture of shared experiences provides an unfair advantage to those who are united. This idea of shared experiential knowledge helps develop counter-stories to the quote-unquote Great American Game, and acts as another element of CRT. With Lamar's unity of his homeboys, he possesses a threat to the long-standing system with the community's shared knowledge. This experiential knowledge strengthens the narrative of the African American identity, challenging the stereotypes rather than circumventing them. This challenge causes Jackson to call for the hypothetical scorekeeper of the Great American Game to instill a penalty of deduction of one life, representing the opposition that occurs with resistance. However, to a degree, this performance is still a representation of some of the struggles marginalized communities face. While I and many left-wing scholars in the past have used CRT as a framework for analysis, those on the right view critical race theory as an all-encompassing term for every subject they don't want taught in schools.
We will get critical race theory out of our schools, out of our military, and out of every part of our federal, state, and local governments. One of our highest priorities under a Republican Congress will be to stop left-wing censorship and to restore free speech. You hear that, the media in America?
President Trump's current administration, he signed an executive order banning the use of federal money for the education of anything related to critical race theory. However, critical race theory gives us an opportunity to understand the flaws within our system, and a chance to ask ourselves, how did the system happen, and why is it working how it is today? In my opinion, Kendrick Lamar challenged the president with his performance, as he was in attendance that night as well. Furthermore, schools are challenging not only his attacks on critical race theory, but his attacks on education as a whole. The banning of CRT takes away this opportunity, forcing us to the next generation to conform to a system that ultimately works against groups that have been marginalized. Without critical race theory, we are unable to acknowledge injustice, and moreover, we're unable to act against it.